Just a little context for what I'm going to read. Last year, I wrote a story called Big Al Shepard Plays Baseball on the Moon, and it was a baseball alternate history about Apollo 13. And it was the fastest, I sold it faster than any story I've ever sold before. It sold 4 hours after I submitted it. And I got kind of addicted to baseball alternate history. So this is another one. I wrote the first draft over the summer. I've written part of the second draft. So I'm going to read 2 scenes, the first 2 scenes. When I timed it last night, it was like 13 minutes. It's not very much. But that's the context. It's a baseball alternate history. It's called Strays, and it goes something like this. Life is a long preparation for something that never happens. William Butler Yeats. 1. I never intended to tell the story of how Floyd Ibsen helped the Chicago Cubs win the World Series in 1999. I planned to take that entire business to my grave. Living as I do in this cabin on the outskirts of Ambler, Alaska, the story would simply confirm what the townspeople already think of me. I'm a crazy old mountain man, a Grizzly Adams minus the bear and short a few marbles upstairs. The truth is, I've been afraid to tell the story. What if I am crazy? What if I imagine the whole things? Not the Cubs winning the series, of course. You don't even have to be a fan of the game to know that in 1999, the Cubs broke a 91-year championship drought. No, what troubled me most of all across all the decades since is a simple question. What if I had imagined the Strays? I read somewhere that back in the 19th century, astronomers discovered the planet Neptune through a statistical anomaly. The math said that there should be a planet wandering about out there, and sure enough, when the scientists aimed their telescopes where the equations directed them, it was right where it was supposed to be. Neptune had even showed up in earlier photos. It simply had never been recognized as a planet. You could say the same thing about the Strays. They were there all along and were never recognized for what they were. And I discovered them in a similar fashion. I wasn't working with planetary orbits or laws of gravitation. I found the Strays by looking at batting averages, wins above replacement players, runs created, range factors, win shares, earned run averages, and countless other statistics which have grown up like weeds around baseball for the better part of 2 centuries. For nearly 3 decades, I've lived in a state of mild cognitive dissonance. I felt certain that the Strays existed, and yet I had to consider the possibility that they only existed in my mind. So I was prepared to take the story to my grave. But then, 2 days ago, when Robbie brought my supplies for the week, the manila envelope was among them, and that changed everything. I get very little mail because no one knows that I'm here. Townies know me, of course, but to them I'm just a grizzled old man who lives out in the woods. On the rare occasions they see me, usually when I sit in the bleachers for a local ball game, they say, "Hello there, Mr. Ibsen." But that isn't my real name. It's a name I stole from the ball player who won the series for the Cubs. But the address on the yellow envelope read, Floyd Ibsen, Ambler, Alaska. No return address, just one of those postmark codes that I couldn't make any sense of. I asked Robbie if he could read the code. He peered through those funny glasses he wears and said, Sedona, Arizona. All of the strength drained from my legs. In my 89 years on Earth, that has happened only one other time. I collapsed onto the ragged sofa. "You all right, Mr. Ibsen?" Robbie asked. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The spit had dried in my mouth. I managed to get out one word, "Yeah." "Isn't Sedona a ghost town?" "Yeah," I repeated. "There were ghosts all right. They were here in the room with me. They filled the envelope that rested on my lap. I could hear their rustlings within." "You need anything else?" "No, thanks, Robbie. Money's on the tin by the door." The boy smiled, collected the bills, and opened the door. He paused halfway out, half in sunlight, half in shadow. "You sure you're okay?" "Tired," I said. "Just tired." "See you next week, then?" His voice rose on the final word, and his concern was touching. "Robbie's a good boy. He's been bringing my groceries for 2 years now." "Next week," I said, and off he went, leaving me in the small cabin which has served as my home for what seems like a lifetime. But not alone. Oh no, not alone. Only one person in the world outside Ambler might address a piece of mail to me as Floyd Ibsen, a person I'd only met on 2 occasions, and she was almost certainly dead. I can't say how long I stared at the envelope. When Robbie arrived, it had been mid-afternoon. Now the shadows moved across the walls of the kitchen the way the shadows whisked across the outfield grass on a windy summer day. My age-spotted right hand rested on the envelope, fingers tapping slowly. So long as that envelope remained sealed, whatever was inside might as well not exist. It would only exist if I tore it open and peeked within. I thought about tossing it into the stove without ever looking at it. But something told me to look. Something told me I'd find answers within. It was a deal with the devil, that envelope was. The question was one of balance. Did its contents outvalue my soul? The kitchen windows faced west. The sun dipped below the hills across the lake, casting long shadows and painting the sky an angry violet. I remember thinking, Josh, you can take the story to your grave. No one needs to know. But would I rest in peace without knowing for certain myself? I slid a ragged thumbnail along the seam of the envelope without having made a conscious decision. When I saw what was inside, I knew for certain that it had all been real. I was not crazy. Floyd Ibsen had helped the Cubs win the series in '99. The Strays had helped them win. God knows what else they'd done. And to think I discovered them through an accident of curiosity and statistics, just like those astronomers who found an entire planet billions of miles away. Only this was far, far bigger than just a planet. I'm tired, but I've had 2 days to think, and now that I know I'm not crazy, now that I have an inkling of why the Strays did what they did, I'm not sleeping until I've written it all down. I'm old enough to know that any time I shut my eyes for the night, there's a good chance I won't open them in the morning, and I need to tell this story if I'm to find any peace. 2. Here's how it happened in Game 7 of the 1999 World Series. Wrigley Field, bottom of the 19th inning with the score tied 4-4. The Yankees were fighting the Cubs all the way, and no team seemed to want to give any ground. This was winner-take-all in its most primal form. It's one of the great things about baseball, actually. You play until you win, or you lose. Baseball is a game not bounded by time. Mark Grace led off the inning for the Cubs, and when he came to the plate, the crowd of 38,902 fans let out a roar. Have you ever noticed how a baseball stadium sounds just like the ocean echoing within a seashell? When the crowd gets into it, it's like a tidal wave crashing on the shore. David Cone stood on the mound for New York. He'd come into the game in the 17th inning, having pitched 7 solid innings back in Game 5. That meant he was pitching on 3 days' rest. But the Yankees had no choice. There was no one left to put in. Grace got Cone's first pitch through the gap in right center. Cone spun around to watch the play unfold, and a few seconds later, Mark Grace touched second base with a stand-up double. The crowd stepped it up a notch. You could feel the vibration in your chest. It rattled my bones. Henry Rodriguez came up next for the Cubs. I remember he gave his cleats a good tap at that big Louisville slugger he held on his shoulder. It was about the only thing the bat was good for. Cone struck him out in 3 pitches. I remember watching a tape of the game in the days following the Cubs' win. When Rodriguez was caught looking at that third strike, Joe Buck, who called the game for the big network, said he thought the pitch was a ball. Joe, Tim McCarver said in that smooth southern drawl of his, context is everything. I thought it was just one of those things McCarver said to fill dead air, but now I believe he's right. Context is everything. I didn't have the context back then, but thanks to what came in the mail, I have it now. David Cone's first pitch to Jose Hernandez got away from him, and Mark Grace took advantage of it, racing over to third base with only 1 out. Cone came back quickly with 2 strikes. His next pitch was just off the plate, and although Hernandez appeared to be sitting on it, he got under it and drilled a major league pop-up to shallow center. Grace had no chance to advance home. It was with 2 outs in the bottom of the 19th inning that Floyd Ibsen came to the plate. It was also about that time that I began to feel a sharp pain running down my left arm. A heart attack never crossed my mind. I was worried about something much more sinister. I'd lost my left arm in the jungles of Southeast Asia 3 decades earlier, and this was the first time in nearly 30 years that I'd felt any sign of phantom pain. At the same time, I began to feel strange. I got that tunnel vision feeling I get when I drank too much, and it was coupled by a kind of out-of-body feeling, also something I experienced when I drank. But I was cold sober. I heard somebody nearby yell, "Oh, come on, who the hell's this guy?" Ibsen was lanky, tall, almost ageless. He could have been Ted Williams or Lou Gehrig. He came in to pinch hit in the 16th inning and then stayed in the game at second base. On the broadcast, Joe Buck had said of him, "Not a particularly productive hitter, Tim, batting just .210 on the season." "But he's had his moments this season," McCarver replied, "and he's got a chance to make history here tonight." David Cone, who earlier in the season tossed a perfect game, now put down 2 perfect strikes, quickly getting ahead of Ibsen. One more strike, or a ground out or pop-up, and the game would roll into the 20th inning. The infield played deep to ensure nothing got through, and Chuck Knobloch played close to second base. Ibsen, who was a kind of utility pinch hitter for the Cubs since he was called up at the beginning of the season, was known to be a pull hitter. Cone went into his windup and the stadium held its breath. As Cone delivered, I watched Ibsen creep closer to the plate. Cone let fly a wicked curveball, what Jim Bouton might have called a motherfucking curveball, that broke so tightly it would have hit Ibsen had he been a lefty. It was a wasted pitch, and it should have brought the count to 1-2, but that isn't what happened. Floyd Ibsen lunged at the pitch. He caught it off the end of his bat. I could tell by the sound that it wasn't a solid hit, and at first I thought he fouled it off. But Ibsen was off and running, and I saw the ball bounce 3 or 4 feet into the grass in front of home plate and die there. What happened next was immortalized in the headline of the New York Post the following morning: "The Great Confusion." Today, that phrase is like the shot heard round the world. Every baseball fan knows it. David Cone sprang cat-like from the mound, attempting to barehand the ball. Joe Girardi hurled his catcher's mask into foul territory and charged forward like a knight in battle armor. Tino Martinez, eyes blazing, raced down the first baseline. Chuck Knobloch, who'd been playing close to second, now made a break to cover first. In retrospect, everyone involved in the Great Confusion can be forgiven. They'd been playing for over 6 hours. October 28th had melted into October 29th. The players, the umpires, even the fans were exhausted. Girardi got to the ball first. Tino Martinez went to his knees to allow the catcher to throw over him. Girardi hesitated, double pumped. Knobloch hadn't made it to first yet. There was no one to cover the bag. Cone saw this and ran to cover home, but he'd only taken 2 steps when Mark Grace slid across the plate in a cloud of brown dust. The home plate umpire swiped his arm, signaling the runner was safe. Wrigley Field erupted. The Chicago Cubs were world champions. The Chicago police had lined the edge of the field, but it made no difference. The fans flooded over them. I watched Floyd Ibsen cross first base and then disappear in a tsunami of cheering Chicago fans. The entire press box went into hysterics, and I was among them. The pain in my missing arm seemed to fade into the background. Meanwhile, what had been Wrigley Field was now an undulating sea of Chicago Cubs fans. The players, coaches, the crew, the press, and the police mixed with the fans in a chaotic foam. Eventually, the players made it into the clubhouse to celebrate. I watched them drench one another with crates of champagne. I'd come down to the clubhouse hoping to get Floyd Ibsen to sign the official scorecard, but he wasn't there. I asked around. No one had seen him. Like the mysterious pain in my missing arm, he had vanished. As far as anyone knows, he was never seen or heard from again.
I'm having nightmares. I've done so many games. It's a massive overtime, especially when it's West Coast games, and you're sitting there, and with every pitch, you're adding up the OT you're going to pay for this.